many problems we have had with granite. This has not been one.
Got a meeting tomorrow about the future of that.
All right, popped up on your screen for a second.
Hey, we didn't have audio. I fixed it, try again.
Okay.
This is the streaming test for the Board of Commissioners August 12 work session. Today, the board will talk about a one water plan update, their legislative goals, and a long-term financial model.
And today is November.
Whatever.
It's just a test.
I'm going to say, Ben, you are pushing us.
Turn-
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to see everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with the Board of Commissioners work session for Tuesday, November 12th. We have a couple of things on the agenda today. The first thing I want to note is that Commissioner Adamson has an excused absence. She's not here today. The first thing on our agenda is One Water updates. So Nancy is here to take us through some updates on the One Water plan. Hi, Nancy. While Nancy's getting ready, I just want to mention to my colleagues that there's a one-pager at your seat about the food security plan, food justice cohort, and we'll talk about that or hear from them after this work session. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Nancy. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me here today. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So I think I've provided some updates on this in some form or fashion over the last several years, but I think this is actually the first time I've seen you in person, so it's nice to see you in person. So today, I'm going to provide some updates on the One Water plan and plus. And so this is kind of an outline of what we'll be talking about today. So I want to start with just, again, kind of a refresher and overview of what is One Water, and then provide some examples of some regional One Water initiatives that kind of are applying that One Water approach in our region. Take kind of a deep dive into where we are with the Wake One Water plan, and then show some examples, projects that we currently are implementing right now. So this is a diagram from the U.S. Water Alliance that really just outlines this idea of a One Water approach, and it acknowledges that, you know, water is beyond just water quality or water quantity. It touches kind of all aspects of our life. And so, you know, of course, we see the number one is reliable and resilient water utilities. And this, of course, became ever more evident with the recent impacts of Hurricane Helene. We can't do much if we don't have reliable water supply. It's critical for thriving cities. And so, you know, I remain strong in my belief that one of the reasons Wake County and the Triangle is such a great place to live is its high quality of life. And a lot of that is driven by water resources and the great the access to water resources that we have in this area. Competitive business and industry. As we continue to grow, we can't do this without water. And I think, you know, the Raleigh Chamber has been great in recognizing this as well. But a great example is in Western Wake County, it's such a boom for the life science industry. These are heavy water users, and we're not going to be able to continue to support this kind of growth and economic development if we don't plan and have appropriate water to support these industries. Agriculture, of course, water is fundamental to agricultural systems, not only for irrigation, but, you know, we continue to hear through our stakeholder meetings, you know, they're also equally concerned and engaged with stormwater management because that runoff affects their lands, and we need to make sure that, you know, we're considering stormwater management as that has impacts on the agriculture community as well. Social and economic inclusion is a big piece of this. One Water really, you know, what makes it a little different than your traditional water quality plan is that it really does try to engage the community and really help increase the community's awareness of water and think about water equity across the board. And then, of course, healthy waterways. Again, you know, we have Falls Lake, Jordan Lake. These are resources that so many in Wake County enjoy for recreational purposes and beyond. And so, you know, without keeping those waters healthy, you know, we want to maintain those resources. So these are some example One Water initiatives that we have already kind of taking place in the area. So some of you may have seen this slide before, but I'll just provide a kind of a brief recap. So the Upper Neuse River Basin Association covers the protection and works towards watershed management for the Falls Lake watershed. So this includes 7 municipalities, 6 counties, soil and water conservation districts, all working together on the management of Falls Lake, which is, of course, the primary water supply for Raleigh and much of Wake County, but also a large, you know, recreational resource. One of the outputs of this collaboration has been the interim alternative implementation approach, which is a compliance approach to the Falls Lake rules, which I think some of you have heard about, and I'll provide some examples of that later in the presentation. Jordan Lake One Water on the western side is also a major water supply for the western part of western counties, Apex, Cary, and but the One Water organization, the One Water approach, actually extends from Guilford County to Wake County, and we have representatives across the board. Commissioner Miles is our representative for Jordan Lake One Water, and it's acknowledgement that, you know, the things that folks do in Greensboro and Alamance County, all of that matters. All of that is taking place in the watershed and drains to Jordan Lake. And so we need to work together and collaborate on solutions. And so Jordan Lake is really looking for watershed protection that has co-benefits for social, economic, and environment. And then the kind of purple watershed right in the middle of your screen here is the Walnut Creek watershed. And while small, it just kind of demonstrates, I guess, this can take place at different scales. And this has actually been an example, One Water approach that's got the longest history of them all. So, and the strength of this approach is really community, and it highlights the importance of engaging the community, listening to the community, and working with community partners. It's just down the road, southeast Raleigh, in the Walnut Creek Wetlands Center, if any of you have been there. But it includes partners with federal, state, NC State University, and was recently recognized by the federal government as the 21st Urban Waters Federal Partnership. And then finally, we have the Wake One Water Plan, and I'll provide more detail on that. So the One Water Plan, Wake One Water Plan, just quick kind of background of where this started. In 2019, we initiated what we're calling phase one of the plan, which was the USGS groundwater study. And this is a cost-share partnership that we have with USGS that one of the first things that we accomplished with this is developing a countywide groundwater monitoring network. We've developed a stormwater, a soil and water balance model that helps us understand the groundwater budget for the county for the first phase of this project, and currently working to develop a a groundwater model for this. And while it's taken longer than we initially hoped, we see the end in sight, and we hope to have that completed in the next year. Phase two of the One Water Plan was approved in 2022 through the Wake County Board of Commissioners through ARPA funding, and that really brings together all the different components of water, as you'll see. So again, stepping back on what we are trying to accomplish and what is the Wake One Water Plan. It's a 50-year water supply plan, and really what makes it different, again, is it's not just an equation that's looking at, you know, how much water do we have, how much do we need. It's looking to tie into development, land use planning, transportation planning, and it really is trying to break down the silos and acknowledging, you know, whether we're looking at wastewater, stormwater, groundwater, surface water, it's all connected, and so it's a holistic approach to water. As Wake County grows, we want to make sure that we have the water to support agriculture, businesses, residents, and protect our natural resources. And, you know, as with this increasing growth and the unpredictable kind of weather extremes, we know that we have to be more proactive and plan for the future water quality and quantity challenges. So this plan is an effort to kind of take a more proactive approach and work together with our partners on strategies. You know, we know that the strategies of the past are not going to prepare us well for the future. We need to be thinking differently and innovatively on how we can work together to meet the needs of the future. So just to provide a little landscape of all the different players for water in the county, Wake County itself is in charge of overseeing private wells, groundwater, on-site wastewater systems, so septic systems, through the on-site water program led by Evan Kane. And then we also have stormwater management for Wake County jurisdiction and interlocal agreements with some of the smaller municipalities, so Wendell, Zebulon, and Rolesville. And so that's kind of one piece. And then we have, of course, our municipalities. And we have 5 major utilities, Cary, Raleigh, Fuquay-Varina, Holly Springs, and Apex, that help provide drinking water to our primary, our municipalities throughout the county. And, Raleigh has agreements with some of the smaller municipalities, such as Roseville and Zebulon, that provides water to those smaller communities. Wastewater recovery facilities. We, again, have 5 major wastewater recovery facilities that provide wastewater treatment for a lot of the municipalities throughout the county. And then we have many different stormwater utilities that manage wastewater for each municipality. So quite a matrix. And then on top of that, we have private water managers. So the private community manages some of these larger community wells that support subdivisions. Example would be in Falls Lake Watershed, where we don't have municipal water lines extending into the watershed, but we do have some of these subdivisions developing. So we have private water suppliers like Aqua that could provide community wells or community wastewater treatment. So you see, there are lots of different entities providing a lot of different services for water, but we're all working with the same amount of water, right? So we've just kind of highlights we've got to be working together, talking, and kind of collaborating on how we manage this water moving forward. So this is just a high-level outline of the phases of the One Water Plan. Again, phase 1 being the groundwater study with USGS. Phase 2, which brings together all those different pieces of the water, stormwater, wastewater, surface water, groundwater, and really tries to bring in community engagement as we develop these strategies. And then phase 3, which will be implementation. And, importantly, this is not a plan that we're going to put on the shelf. It is intended to be a living plan. We're doing our best with the data we have today to project out the needs for the next 50 years. But we know, we could only do the best that we can. So we're going to have to revisit this plan, look at updated data, look at updated kind of development and growth, and continue to make this an active and living plan. Phase 2 of the plan, again, kicked off in fall of 2022 and has 3 primary tasks. The first being stakeholder outreach and visioning, the second, data development analysis, and the final will be plan development. So we primarily wrapped up task 1, engagement and outreach. We kicked this program off with our project team interviewing 13 different programs across the county, really, again, acknowledging that, water doesn't reside only in the Water Quality Division. We need to talk to Health and Human Services, Parks, Recreation, Open Space, General Service Administration. All these different programs, interact with water in different ways, and so we need to understand how they do and how we can kind of align some of their goals and needs in the plan. In December of 2022, we had a One Water Vision Summit, and this included water resource managers and kind of planners from all the different municipalities across the county, as well as representatives from like the agriculture industry and environmental advocacy groups. And this just helped us kind of think big and really brainstorm kind of the vision for Wake County's future in water and take a big picture view there. We had several stakeholder virtual meetings that we kind of grouped in 3 different categories of groups. So we had community organizations, we had the business community, and then we had environmental advocacy and academic. And these were virtual, and so we heard a lot of input about, what are the challenges, and then what do you see as opportunities that you'd like to accomplish. So we got a lot of great input through those meetings. And then in the spring of 2023, we kicked off an online public survey, and with a lot of help of our communications department and support from other members, we got over 1,600 responses, and we were able to get every zip code across the county represented as part of that survey. And the top 5 issues that rose to the top, and folks could, you could pick several different issues. You didn't have to just pick 1 or 2. That rose to the top as important or very important, included providing equal access to safe drinking water for all residents. So I think it's clear that this very much aligns with the board's strategic goals to provide clean and safe water to the residents of Wake County. We also heard that, folks are very aware and want to protect groundwater. So that's great to hear because, as Evan always says, groundwater's tough because you can't see it. It's underground. But we have a lot of folks that are on private wells and want to make sure that that groundwater is protected. Reducing pollution and water runoff from roadways as we continue to develop. We continue to have stormwater runoff. This can lead to erosion and other impacts. And so trying to come up with strategies to manage that as we continue to grow. Designing water systems that can withstand extreme events. So again, the floods are becoming more frequent, even if they're not hurricane floods. These strong bursts, intense storms creates localized flooding across the county. So we need to be thinking about how we can better manage for these events. And then finally, protecting natural landscapes. I think, folks really appreciate and acknowledge the access that we have to open space and green space in the county. And so I want to make sure that we continue to protect that. So the vision kind of focuses on 4 main areas: community, economy, governance, and environment. And then from that larger vision, we have 5 primary goals. So I'll go through each of these in more detail. But the first being, we want to build knowledge, collaboration, and partnerships. We want to increase community resilience to climate change. We want to cultivate community support and increase folks' awareness of the value of water. We want to embed equity and environmental justice into water management, and then support the local economy and fiscal accountability. So we're in a unique place, Wake County, with the opportunity to collaborate with many, our partnerships with universities. We've got engaged municipalities. And Wake Tech is a great resource, and so we want to make sure that we are maximizing partnerships as we move forward with this plan. We want to think about how we can integrate water at the forefront when we're planning for future development and land use, and think about, what the implications are for water and water management strategies as part of that planning effort. And this was encouraging, we heard this in our localized, our business community virtual meeting is, the business community said they're interested in public-private partnerships. So how can we tap into and build some of those public-private partnerships? And, many of the businesses that are, I think, moving to Wake County are coming from different parts of the country or world, and, may have different perspectives and different ideas of how we can do this. We want to increase community resilience to climate change. So again, protect the groundwater. This is a major source of drinking water for many residents in Wake County. Green stormwater infrastructure. I think you've probably heard me talk about this in the past, but this is a big theme for stormwater management. It's a different way of managing stormwater. So it not only provides the water quality treatment, it provides green space, it provides water pollinator habitat, and it can be a community benefit and contributing green space to where you live. Water recovery and reuse is an important one. I think that's something that we are really looking into with our municipal partners throughout the plan is, again, we want to maximize the value of water. So not just use it once and discharge it and be done with it. How can we reuse it? We don't have an endless supply. We need to think about how we can reuse, water for different uses. The hazard mitigation plan, which I know what county's plan is currently being updated, but there's lots of opportunities that align, future water management strategies with the hazard mitigation plans when we think about flooding and public safety. So we will be thinking about that throughout this plan development. And then again, just water conservation strategies. We're fortunate, we have access to water, but, much of Western United States, it's a whole different ballpark. They do not have ready access to water, and they're in some, they've had to be very innovative in how they deal with water because of the challenges that they're experiencing. So we'd like to be proactive, learn from their experiences, and kind of get ahead of this. We want to cultivate community support. I mentioned, that's a huge part of this plan. We want to engage the community as we talk about water, increase their awareness, and involve them in the strategy development. So we do this through public outreach, This photo is an example of the Walnut Creek watershed community that I mentioned with a community event they had at Southeastern YMCA, and really make sure that we're thinking about the community and how our strategies can be a benefit to them and not a negative impact. Business and development engagement, that's another, kind of community group we want to continue to engage. And then, as I mentioned, once the plan's developed, we don't want to stop. We want to continue to keep folks engaged and aware and involved in how they manage their water, how they maintain their septic systems. Are they conserving water in their house? Are they recycling? Things like that. We want to make sure that, they remain engaged beyond, 2026. We talk about water equity, and this is, again, making sure that everybody has access to a safe water supply, safe drinking water. And this may also involve providing assistance to vulnerable communities, whether that's through septic repairs or well repairs, or, in utility standpoint, thinking about how we can support their access to affordable water. Collaboration through trusted leaders. We know that our local community groups have trusted leaders that the community turns to when they have questions, and so we want to work with them and through them through this process. And again, receive their input through these management actions. And we will be having community meetings in the spring of this year as we develop strategies to get feedback from the community. And then support local economy and fiscal accountability. So this is, again, example of a kind of community food forest that's being developed just down the street on a greenway as part of the Walnut Creek watershed effort. And it's just providing benefit to the community. We want to make sure that we produce projects that have those triple bottom line benefits, and develop, strategies that have workforce development opportunities, and enhance the quality of life that residents of Wake County have. And I think, one of the lessons we've learned through folks that have developed these plans and implemented these plans over the years is that, we need to be mindful, we need to be careful as we roll out these great strategies that, we don't, as we increase the green space and make these places even better and more attractive places to live, we don't displace the people that have lived there their entire lives. So we need to, keep that at the forefront of our minds as we develop strategies and listen to the community. And then I think, there's many workforce development opportunities, whether it's through stormwater, green stormwater infrastructure, maintenance, things like that, that we can integrate as we think about strategies moving forward. So it's a lot to pull together, but we've accomplished a lot to date, and we are on our way. So the tasks completed to date, we've recently wrapped up our stormwater evaluation, surface water and drought vulnerability, and our wastewater treatment. We are in the process of trying to wrap up our groundwater assessment and working on the model for the future climate and land use impacts. And so all of this information will be used to kind of figure out what our baseline is, and then as we talk about strategies and we look at our model for future land use and growth, and to the best of our ability, the global climate scenarios, what does that mean for the strategies that we propose? One thing I did not mention early on, but at the forefront, our project team, we shared with them, a lot of the planning efforts that Wake County has already developed, and we shared Plan Wake. They were really excited. They said, well, this completely aligns with, the thought process of One Water. So they have been working with Plan Wake as kind of a template and that growth development framework as we think about, what areas of the county do we want to keep as rural, what areas do we want to keep as those urban centers. And as we develop this plan, we're having that as kind of the backdrop and thinking about, well, given that, what strategies are appropriate in the rural and agricultural watersheds, what strategies should we think about for these urban city centers? And so I did want to just take a few moments and highlight a few projects that we have in the ground to kind of show how these partnerships and collaborations can come forward while we are still developing the Wake One Water Plan. As I mentioned, there's a lot of One Water initiatives taking place across the county. And so I'll highlight a few of those. So this is, again, I mentioned the Upper Neuse River Basin Association, which moved forward the Falls Lake IEI Interim Alternative Implementation Approach. This is a joint compliance approach that allows us to comply with the Falls Lake existing development rules. And it's an investment-based strategies. And so the board has, we have an annual investment that we contribute to watershed improvement projects. And what this has allowed us to do is partner with Wake Soil and Water Conservation District to get some stream restoration and stream stabilization projects in the ground in Falls Lake watershed. When we talk about, partners and strengths, Wake Soil and Water does amazing work, and they have that trusted relationships with many of the landowners throughout the county. And they also have a small amount of funding that they are able to contribute to these projects, but rarely does it cover the entire cost of the project. So we're able to use this IEI matching fund with Soil and Water's funding to help landowners get these projects and reduce kind of their stream bank erosion and concerns on their site, and provides stream improvement and water quality improvement in Falls Lake watershed. So we have completed 2 of these with Soil and Water. This is an example of a stormwater retrofit project that's currently being completed at Northern Wake Fire Station number 2. And this is, again, a partnership with funding from Soil and Water Conservation District, as well as GSA's been a great partner in helping manage this project from the beginning. This project was on the books. The fire station itself was developed pre-current stormwater regulations and rules, and so it was not meeting current water quality standards. It had been identified by Soil and Water many, many years ago as a great opportunity for retrofits and water quality improvement. It had been identified in many Neuse River reports, but we did not have the funds to move it forward until we were able to partner with Soil and Water and apply this IEI funding. So it will now, go beyond, the minimum water quality standards for stormwater and provide water quality improvements to Falls Lake. I want to talk a little bit about the water partnership, which I think many of you know about. Includes representatives from all municipalities in the county, as well as agricultural and, private well owners, citizen representatives. We have a Green Stormwater Infrastructure Subcommittee on this as part of the water partnership, and one of our recent new members is a representative North Carolina Department of Transportation, and he came to the group and he said, we need to mitigate impacts associated with 540, and we've got funding to contribute to local, stormwater retrofits. We would rather invest in the community's projects than go out and search for our own. Do any of you have a need or projects? So fortunately, we had a list that we had pulled together with our partners. So DOT has already moved forward. It was, they made it very little bureaucracy, and they are this is an example of a project they're doing at Wake Tech, where they're going to install a cistern. They've got at least one other project with Wake Tech. They're working with Morrisville. They're working with Cary. They're working with Holly Springs. And they're funding complete design and construction of the projects. It's on the partner to maintain it. So again, working together can pay off. And then I just want to highlight the public engagement, which I've reiterated several times is such a key part of this plan. I have to give a huge shout out to Wake County Communications. They're just phenomenal. They've worked us and been a huge supporter of this plan from day one. And they've helped us put forth a series of videos with individuals sharing their perspectives on water, whether it's business, agriculture, and the 2 most recent videos of youth and why water is important to them and why we need to think about protecting water. So our next steps in the process, we have a number of technical workshops coming up that we will be inviting our municipal utility partners and subject matter experts. A week from today, we will be having one on stormwater and flood resilience. In early December, we will be holding one for wastewater and nutrient management. And then following the new year, we'll have one on groundwater and surface water supplies. So All of these will help us work with our partners, develop, what strategies are top, do we want to kind of start with for a draft, and do we think we really want to focus on, and then we will take these to the community. We will have a public survey, and then hopefully by winter of 2026, we will have a final One Water plan that we can continue to update as projects are implemented and new data becomes available. That's what I've got, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I really appreciate it. I've recently asked Commissioner Mile to give me an update about the Upper Neuse River Basin, and he was like, well, we could talk about it, but we're good talking to each other. Like, we have the same body of knowledge, so I appreciate you giving us the updates. Anybody have questions for Nancy? Commissioner Calabria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you. It looks like a lot of work. It's much appreciated for sure. So just one or two things. One, you talked a little bit about the importance of everyone having equitable access to safe drinking water. And this is a good reminder that it's not necessarily true that everyone in Wake County right now does have equitable access to drinking water. And so mindful of the public health implications potentially of that, but also knowing we can't do, there's a timeline for everything. I was wondering if you might say a little bit more about that, where we are with studying that and what we know about the scope of that problem. And the reason I ask is because I know the larger body of work in the 3 phases you identified has plan implementation beginning in 2026, but that sub-issue in particular seems to be, at least to my mind, a little bit more acute. And so I'd just be curious if you could give us a thumbnail sketch as to where we are, what we're seeing in terms of gaps in having safe drinking water, and maybe what can be done about it in the medium term, let's say.
Well, I think, we're wrapping up the groundwater assessment, and fortunately, the groundwater program has done a great job sampling water quality through their kind of private well and permitting program over the years. So that was a great body of knowledge that we were able to share. I think there's a couple, I guess, top issues that come to my mind. One, when we think about private wells, we know that we have the eastern radiological contamination across eastern Wake County. And so
The Rollsville Shale, as they say.
yeah. And so I think that's one of the things we'll be looking at is how do we think forward with our municipal partners and partnering on what is the right solution? Because I think the right solution is going to vary depending on where you are in the county. Sometimes it may be a connection to the utilities. Sometimes it may be treatment at the well. And, it's going to be case by case. But we need to come up, I think, with different tools in the toolbox to help meet these different strategies. And then I would say also, I continue to say affordability is just a big piece of the puzzle of affordable water, whether that means from a utility bill or whether it means, being able to maintain your septic system and maintain a well. I think those are all big pieces that we need to think about when we're talking about, making sure everybody has that access. And Evan, I'm sure, could talk more eloquently on the groundwater piece.
If I may, good afternoon. Evan Kane. Thanks. Evan Kane, I'm the director of the On-Site Water Protection Division, which is in the Department of Health and Human Services, and I've been working with Nancy over the years as a collaborator on this. To your specific point, Commissioner Calabria, I'll just say we're within on-site water protection. We're not waiting for the plan to start implementation. Through the county's ARPA allocation, we've been implementing a financial assistance program for well and septic repairs for the last 2 years, and we're getting ready to move into a phase 2 of that pilot program where we'll be, phase 1, we worked with Wake County Housing Affordability and Community Revitalization to implement that financial assistance. In phase 2, we hope to work with an outside nonprofit organization to continue that. And we'll also be working as funds and staff availability allow us to working to pilot different efforts to reach out to people with a focus specifically on things like social equity and vulnerable populations to get information to people's hands and to get, wherever we can, financial assistance into their hands to help with both drinking water and wastewater issues for folks with on-site systems.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. And I seem to remember, coincident with our conversations about how to fix orphan roads, we had entertained or maybe established a separate fund that would allow people to, cover improvements to their water supply. And I seem to remember there were also some federal grants that we were able to take more robust advantage of at that time as well, or maybe state funding plans. But whenever you get to that appropriate time in the next couple of months, I just put it out there, maybe this is a good committee topic of conversation once we can dig in a little bit more, because obviously the prospect of a public health, hazard, for lack of a better word, is something that we want to kind of keep front of mind. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Thanks, Willa, for that opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Calabria. Manager Ellis, did you have a comment?
Nancy, did I see a One Water conference last week? Is there a One Water conference?
It's funny, there was a North Carolina-centric One Water conference that I was not able to attend, but so that was a local, and I know many people who attended, and then there's also a national conference, so yeah. Yep.
Other comments? Commissioner Mile.
Yes, thank you so much, Nancy, for that great presentation. As everyone can tell, there's a lot of moving components to what we are dealing with here as far as our water system. Especially when you're talking about the J-Lo around the Jordan Lake and, of course, the upper Neuse River area that we're working in. So I just want to thank you for bringing all this forward, and I'm glad Commissioner Calabria made a comment and brought up the issue, because we know there's a lot of community wells up around the Falls Lake area, but then we get into a lot of wells, especially when we start talking around the Roseville, Zebulon, and Wendell area down there, because of that rock formation, which creates a lot of problems for us. So these are type of things that we definitely got to keep in mind from the standpoint as the county continues to grow, and where we will be able to make sure we're able to provide communities and support those communities. So great information, and thank you for bringing this to us today.
Thank you, Commissioner Mile. Commissioner Waters.
Thank you. I echo the appreciation for all the work that has gone forward, and Commissioner Calabria, your question provided some good insight. I just wanted to go back to one point that you made about other parts of the country not having the access to water. Is that based upon their geography, or not being able to keep up with the pace of growth? And I just wonder, as we talk about having 51 people move to Wake County a day, how do you feel the pacing of your work is keeping up with the growth among residential development?
Well, and that's a great question. I think, as far as Western U.S., they are dealing with severe droughts in their water supplies and their rivers, and so some of their primary, water resources, across California, Arizona, those are, they have many of the major supplies are running dry, so they have had to be very creative in how they manage those resources. As far as we go, right now, I think, we're in good shape, but we want to make sure that we are thinking ahead and keep pace with the growth. So that's what our team is looking at, is kind of the growth and the future water demands that are happening as we continue to grow. And so we've got several models that look at, what is our timeline? Are we going to need to expand some of our water utilities? And then when we do get the groundwater model from USGS, we'll have a better understanding of what our groundwater capacity looks like, and use that information to figure out, are there certain areas of the county that are more vulnerable than others, and we need to be thinking twice before we add a lot more wells in that particular area. So all of these are kind of data points that are going to help us make more informed decisions with that moving forward.
Thank you. And just a couple other questions, if I may. So when you've done a lot of the community engagement work, are you finding that this is an issue that is on most people's radar? Are you having to do a lot of education? And based upon that, are there tips and strategies that you're sharing out so that individuals can have an impact on the work, maybe on a smaller scale, but how individuals can contribute to protecting our water supply?
I think that's one of the things that we want to incorporate moving forward when we talk about I think that's not an area that we could strengthen, right? Like, we haven't done probably as great a job as we could be doing, and so as part of the plan, we talk about increasing awareness to water. We want to expand our community presence so that they do think about conservation and day-to-day and how to increase those, increase awareness. I'll say, when we did the public survey, there was kind of a free-form comment, and as I read through all the comments, I was kind of impressed and amazed at how many folks really are paying attention. Folks are aware of the water resources and water concerns, whether it's, the color of the water coming out of the faucet, or whether it's some of the larger water quality news items that are hitting, whether, lead and copper and things like that.
Okay, and thank you. And lastly, I really appreciate all the work that you've done with the future generation, and I think this is an important way to really emphasize career options. I was just thinking about all of the career options that align with the work that you're doing, so really appreciate your investment in our future generation and capturing their voices, and look forward to watching those videos. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, there's some really fantastic models that we've been able to see kind of across the country of how they've been able to tap into youth and grow the workforce, and really just have multiple wins through these projects. So we hope to be looking at some of those examples and seeing how we can bring them here.
Thank you, Commissioner Waters. Commissioner Stallings.
Thank you, Nancy, so much for this presentation, for the comprehensive work, and for what's to come. And I look forward to hearing more over this coming up year. So just a few questions. What are some of the most effective ways to manage healthy waterways and stormwater management? And what role would tree planting have in that if we had the funding for that?
Well, trees, one of my favorite. I feel like they're one of the examples of a strategy that can provide multiple co-benefits, just, through air quality, water quality. It helps reduce erosion by stabilizing the soil. So, it has many water quality benefits through, again, holding that soil in place, intercepting some of the rainwater. It provides water quality treatment as it filters the water. And when I talked about green stormwater infrastructure, that's a lot of what we're talking about, is like, how can we incorporate more trees and plantings as part of the, when we're looking at watershed improvements. We have been excited, and our team has pulled in the tree canopy study developed by the planning group, and that is on our, we are definitely integrating all of that information into how we can move forward, because, it's hand in hand. It's a big piece. And I think if we had, thanks to that study, we already know priority areas identified around the county that would benefit from greater trees and increase equity with green space and those other community benefits. So, I think what we could do is align some of those priorities with the water plan as well.
Yes, I agree. And so given that we have the areas already identified in the county by the tree canopy study, is the biggest obstacle funding for the trees? And if so, could that be one of our priorities in working with our business community or public-private partnerships? Would that be a possibility?
I think that would be a great recommendation that we could use to get the trees in the ground, absolutely. I think, we would again turn to our community partners to help identify, how to implement some of these strategies. But
lastly, how many community food forests do we have in Wake County?
I don't know. I know that Chris Snow mentioned that they are working on developing some of these as part of Beach Bluff, and then we've got one, of course, downstream here at Walnut Creek. Beyond that, I'm not sure, but I think that, that's something that we're going to continue to look into.
Thank you, Commissioner Stallings. Commissioner Calabria.
Thank you. So just piggybacking off of Commissioner Stallings' question regarding tree canopy, it's my recollection that there was a state program that helped support the planting of trees along clear-cut road rights-of-way, along roadsides. Can you remind us of the thumbnail sketch of that program and where we are in terms of our partnership and utilization of those? I think it's funds. They would help fund that reclamation effort, but can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Honestly, I'd have to defer to Tim Maloney and the planning group. I think they were
Okay.
kind of managing that piece, but I do know that they did implement kind of a couple of the pilot areas, pilot planning already. They've already planted a couple areas kind of along the medians, and so they're monitoring those.
That sounds good. And I can follow up with Mr. Maloney. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Calabria. Commissioner Mile.
I'm sorry. Just one last question, Nancy. Hopefully you give us an update. I know there was a major concern, especially around the Falls Lake area there, in terms of dealing with the algae. How is that going? Could you give us an update on that? Because I know with the different municipalities and the different counties involved with the Upper Neuse River Basin there, that's working collaboratively in terms of trying to resolve that issue. And I know there were several techniques and different machinery and different things that were utilized to try to clear up that algae. Can you give us a little bit more information on that?
Yeah, through the UNRBA, they partnered with North Carolina Collaboratory out of UNC to do several water quality and studies across the lake to better understand, what was causing some of the nutrients concerns that have occurred in the past and that DWR was reporting. And I think, really what they found is the water is looking pretty good, and even they found through their models that if we none of the watershed was developed. If we were to convert it all to forest, we would still not meet the current water quality guidelines because, even forests contribute nutrients. So I think, what we are proposing and what we are advocating for as far as Falls Lake is, again, I always refer to this as multiple tools in the toolbox. And so, we can look at stormwater treatment, but we also need to look at planting trees in areas that don't have trees. How can we just do more education and outreach so that folks are aware and take better care of their maintenance and septic systems and things like that. So long story short, I think, they found that the lake quality has actually improved. And I think DWR is, based on recent studies, they are being very receptive and really changing how they're thinking about approaching some of the rules and adopting more of a one water approach because I think, they're recognizing through this data that with increased storm intensities and acknowledging that, so much of the impacts that we're seeing today are the results of decades and decades and decades of development. And, a lot of that gets mobilized in these storms. And so, we're not going to be able to fix, 100 years past, but we can do, proactive strategies, conservation, preservation, tree planting, stormwater management to help continue to hold that line.
Thank you, Commissioner Mile. So Nancy, I just have one quick question. You mentioned urban city centers and thinking about density and economic growth and economic development. And I've been getting a lot of questions lately about the tech industry and how some of the work that the tech industry is doing, how it impacts clean energy, but also how it impacts water and water quality. I know that the southwestern part of the county really worked hard to build infrastructure when it comes to water to attract biotech companies. Mm-hmm. So how are we dealing, I guess, or preparing for the challenge that artificial intelligence and the advancements in the tech industry that are hitting all spheres of business, how is that going to impact the region, and how are we preparing for it?
Well, that's a great question. I think that's one of the things we're going to be kind of digging into more as we talk to the business community and look at these strategies of, better understanding what kind of their water demands are and how we can plan for those.
Okay.
So I don't have the answer today.
That's fine. All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. It's a great presentation. All right, colleagues, the next item on our agenda is the financial model. And Michelle Vendetto is going to talk to us about that. But I think Manager Ellis is going to tell us some things first.
Sure. Thank you. And so Michelle Vendetto is going to discuss how we're looking at making some changes in our budget development process. The current process has been around for quite a while. About 3 years ago, asked Michelle and her team to look at some different ways of budgeting. to be a little more transparent, but also allow us to kind of be more planful going forward. And so what Michelle is going to present to you all today is the direction that we're moving in to develop a budget that not just takes into account the upcoming fiscal year, but also a couple of years down the road based on our revenue forecasting model. So, Michelle, thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Michelle Venditto, Budget Management Services Director. I will also, through the afternoon, be joined by Aaron Brown, about one of our budget managers, and Lindsay Davis, one of our senior analysts. Thank you for your time today. So just highlighting the agenda, I'll start with some planning and fiscal climate discussion and presentation. Then both Aaron and I will kind of work together to introduce you to our multi-year forecast. And then Lindsay will help us round out the discussion, just sharing some public school benchmarking information as we go into our budget planning. And then, of course, any time during the presentation, please interject with any questions. So as we kind of concluded the preparation for last year's FY25 budget, in discussions with David and with our SLT group, we had some discussions around how this year we would be looking differently as we utilized our strategic plan and would have different opportunities to align, operationalize, and identify gaps between the strategic plan goals, our countywide plans, and then our department business plans as we built department initiatives for the upcoming year and thought about the trajectory of refining progress measurement and evaluation. And in thinking about that, we also thought about how we could think about these different approaches to how we look at strategic planning and how we can frame up our multi-year forecasting. So, as you're aware, Wake County has approved our first Wake County strategic plan. You are all familiar with our vision and mission, our 6 different goal areas, and then some of those particular goals that we had identified through Jason's work, sharing with you. That's helping us frame up some of our early fall discussions that will come back to you in January and help, again, to kind of bolster and support our resource planning. Where we are right now in terms of strategic planning is Jason is facilitating focus groups across the organization in those 6 different areas. Here you can see the example being community health and well-being. One of our goals that had been identified was creating and preserving 2,500 affordable housing units by 2029. And so the activity being undertaken right now is meeting with focus groups, with departmental representatives to identify initiatives that are known to be occurring currently in departments, and then other initiatives that could advance the organization towards our 5-year outcomes, which is the length of time upon which that the strategic plan is built. The strategic initiatives are informed by a variety of sources, both previous commissioner goals that align with the current strategic plan goals, existing plans and studies that could go back as far as 10 years. We're reviving those and identifying the current strategies that support any of the strategic plan goals. Jason had kind of executed a community engagement a couple years ago, and also is pursuing that community perception study again this fall. Of course, input from the manager's office as they are directing us, as our departments are just delivering our core services. And then our departments are also building on activities that we've been building over the past few years to build their department business plans. So we are kind of like reorienting from where departments are driving an understanding around what our needs are and wanting to take our strategic plan and understanding our department business plan so that we can have an overarching strategy. And one thing just want to continue making people aware of is Our strategic plan initiative will not have every initiative that every department in the county will be performing. There are still core mandated services that are not in the strategic plan, but we will be looking at all of these in our activities over the next couple of months with the manager's office. And so Jason and I are coming with alignment. How do we align so that we can have a stronger North Star, so to say, that can guide us as decisions are made both in departments, at the manager's level, and at your level as Board of Commissioners. So the next time that you'll probably hear a great deal from Jason and I around resources and the strategic plan will be at the January retreat, where we'll be giving you some update about, again, more on our status, working across those focus groups and our department plans, and then being able to, over time, utilize that information and identifying what our direction is so that we can keep refining our measurement and evaluating our programs. So here a visual that Jason has utilized that I know certainly helps me. This is a journey. We've been on the journey. We continue to be on the journey, and we are rebuilding and reshaping the journey. So again, we are focusing on taking that strategic plan that's been approved, aligning what our current activities are so that we can keep refining where our staff and leadership want to be focusing so that we can move both in some of our mandated services and more of those, big problem-solving outcomes that we want to achieve. And over the next few years, being able to keep refining how we can improve measurement, identify measurement, and have some longitudinal approaches to be able to inform movement. So as we went into this budget year, had some reflections as we were considering what our budget planning year in particular would look like. Both the manager's office and the board and some department heads and employees themselves have received input over the past year, and particularly some more increased volume on some areas of input. We did a revaluation last year, and that had some impacts on the tax bill. There had been some communication around lack of affordability, support for increased school funding, and then some voices around curbing both county and school system funding. So people on opposite sides and a variety of areas of the spectrum, input around employee pay, and then also as we landed on our budget last year, some input around property tax rate increases. So before we share some more information about what our future projections are, I wanted to reflect on the past four to 5 years. This is the time frame since the pandemic. The spring of 2020 was, of course, when the pandemic impacted us, and that impacted our 21 budget. And at that point, we had gone through a very rigorous effort around building the 21 budget, and then we needed to make some refinements as we got into April and May. And so at that point, we had incorporated a small budget reduction. I think we had requested for departments around 7% and landed probably somewhere under a reduction of 7% over that time period. Since then, we have had some budget increases. For FY22, that budget was informed, again, by some of what our expectations were going to be around what sales tax projections and what actuals would ultimately reveal and be realized as. During the recession of 2008-2009, sales tax had truly decreased, and we were expecting something similar that in fact did not come to pass. There were a variety of factors for that, one being federal funding coming into our county government, local county governments, state governments, and also being able to support some private institutions and companies as well. So as we were considering the budget for FY23, we had made some adjustments to recognize that we were in fact going to be able to have some of that additional sales tax support us. So over the past 4 to 5 years, we've had increases in the budget from around 7% to 11%, and those have been around $150 to $175 million year over year that we've added to the budget, and that would be the general fund budget only. Here, reflecting some of the adjustments in the WCPSS budget, as that has been a portion of our budget that is probably, approaching around 40%, 50% when you think about all of our capital incorporated funding as well. And so here just wanted to represent the year-over-year amounts. So 528 would be the amount, the total amount that was budgeted for that FY21 year, and on up to, for FY25, $703 million for the school system. You can see in between increases of the percentage increases, which have been around 8-9%, and then annual year over year, more over the past 3 years, around $50 million. And then also just wanted to show the enrollment. So for FY21, for instance, that's 157,700 students, and for FY25, 179,200, and just recognizing that does include charter schools. In terms of how increases were funded the last 3 years, I spoke some about this, about how we were able to leverage sales tax differently than we had anticipated as we had more experience during the COVID, I don't even know if we would call it a recession, but the COVID impact. And so with FY21, when we did make those small adjustments to reduce the budget, that was also a revaluation year, and there were no changes to the tax rate. And so that was for FY22, we had 60 cents. And then you'll see over for moving into 23, 24, and 25, there was a combination of tax rate increases for both funding operating and capital programs. And again, this past budget was also a revaluation year, and our tax rate was 51.35 cents. And then here, sharing some information about the county's tax rate and other municipal tax rates in our county. Again, I said that the county tax rate was 51.35 cents. Here, the graphic along the top shows the different municipalities in the county and the total tax rate they adopted, and then the combined tax rate with the county highlighted along the top. And then the table at the bottom reflects we have certain districts that we have particular tax rates for as well. And so on your right side here, that just shows for those municipals impacted, what then the additional tax rate for those municipalities would be. So I wanted to see any questions or discussion around this historical information before we talk future-oriented information.
Thank you, Michelle. Questions, comments, anything for discussion before we move forward? Vice Chair?
On that previous slide, I'm just trying to understand some of the little extra things. So, for instance, Cary, Morrisville, Raleigh, and Durham all have to pay some extra tax for something with RTP. Can you explain that?
Yes, they do. Marcus, can you help me while you're here?
Just curious.
RTP is a standalone district, subject to the fire tax. I don't know why that's associated with Cary Morrisville.
I can step in here, Michelle. So this table indicates the maximum possible tax rate, so it's a potential for a resident who touches RTP to have up to that tax rate. And we're not saying that everyone in those areas will be paying that tax rate.
So you're saying, Lindsay, for the individual taxpayer who might be in RTP and Cary?
Yes.
But
it's
that
a
is not all
potential.
of the Cary
Or-
residents.
If they're in some RTP boundary. Okay.
Does that help clarify,
I just
Commissioner
didn't know
Evans?
about
Thank you.
that, so I was just wondering what it was. And then- I know about the Raleigh downtown and Hillsborough. What's the Morrisville $10 about and the Wake Forest 14? I'm just curious. Do we know?
Morrisville has a small municipal service district. It's a very small area, subject to 10 additional cents. I think it was for curb and gutter, street repairs.
And Wake Forest has a downtown district.
Downtown district, okay. Thank you.
No, thank you for the clarifying question. And thanks, Lindsay.
Other questions, comments? Seeing none, Michelle?
All right, so as I said, we'll move into our forward forecasting. As I had shared, and David had shared, he had requested a multi-year financial forecast from our department, Budget and Management Services, and some of this with the mindset around thinking about the community input that had been received, and then also the knowledge of cost escalations, labor cost pressures, construction and land costs, increases in service demands, and also expansion of county services. So Aaron, if you want to come join and get us down to the nitty-gritty technical fun.
Sure thing. So thank you, Michelle. And again, my name is Aaron Brown. I'm one of the budget managers that works in Budget Management Services. And I'm kind of the architect of our multi-year forecast. I'm going to use the next handful of slides to overview the revenue and expenditure assumptions that we created for the scenarios that we're going to review with you today. We're going to start on this slide to talk about our revenue projection. The revenue scenario that we're sharing is the one that we have the most confidence in. It follows historic natural growth trends and matches what finance currently has in our long-term debt service model. Total revenues, that's everything, including property tax, sales taxes, intergovernmental revenues, any user fees that we charge. Total revenue are expected to grow by roughly 2%. That equates to about $50 million of natural growth per year, for a total of $150 million of natural revenue growth over the 3-year projection window that we'll talk about today. Again, that's just natural growth. It doesn't include any adjustments to tax rates other than the 0.25 cent property tax increase planned for FY26 that will support the bonds that were passed by voters for libraries last week. But beyond that, beyond adjusting tax rates, the county actually has very little direct control over our revenue picture. There are external factors that we don't control, like the health of the economy, legislative changes by the state government, legislative changes potentially now by the federal government, that can drastically change what our revenue picture looks like. So for today, we're bringing the one revenue scenario that we believe we have the most confidence in. On the flip side, when we move to expenditures, we have 3 different scenarios to discuss: a low, medium, and high growth model. The 3 scenarios are separated by assumptions and how quickly we invest and grow our services and expand based on the resource allocation decisions that we make. I'm actually going to start with that middle model because that's roughly the growth rate that we've seen going back to FY14. You can think of this as kind of our baseline. If we approach future budget development cycles and future resource allocation decisions the way that we've approached previous years, this is the trajectory that we'll be on. The low and high growth models show what things could look like if we change our resource allocation assumptions. The low model assumes a more restrained growth that's slower than our historical averages, and the high model assumes that we make faster and more frequent investments into high priority services than what we've done in years past. So together, I think of these as kind of setting the parameters of the full range of outcomes that we can see based on the choices that we make. I wouldn't get married to any one model and say this is where we're going to go, but when you stack them together, they give you a range of outcomes that we could see over the next 3 years. So if we actually put the revenue and those expenditure scenarios on a chart, we'll see that all of our modeled scenarios, even our most restrained one, outpaces our natural revenue growth. The chart kind of shows it, and the old adage still holds true that growth does not pay for itself. So if I take this chart and then turn it into actual numbers, you see that the county could be faced with gaps well into the hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 3 years, depending on the choices that we make. We have to be really intentional about the implications of the decisions. This is just a very early version of the model, I want to be clear. As we get deeper into developing the FY26 budget, we'll come back with more refined versions, and you'll see these ranges start to narrow and narrow as we have a better idea of what the FY26 budget will look like and start building out the FY27 and 28 budgets. So this is all I have for you. I will actually pass it back over to Michelle to talk about some of the expenditure pressures that we have coming up on the horizon. Thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Calabria.
So you talked about one of the assumptions being a natural revenue growth of about 2% annually. Is that right? Am I understanding correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
And what has been the annual revenue growth for, let's say, the last few years?
That 2% number also goes back to that FY14. It's a little harder to get to that because when we're adopting budget to budget, if there are tax rate implications or tax rate increases, it's hard to pull out what portion of a revenue increase was tax increase related versus what the natural growth was. But when we look at like the per penny value year to year to year for property taxes, for example, it's about that 2%. If we look at the long-term history for things like sales tax, it's about that 2%.
So in other words, a lot of times when we're looking at, say, sales tax projections, there's sort of a conservatism built in. Is there a conservatism built in, or is that for the past 10 years it's been 2%, so we're just assuming it's 2% going forward?
Yeah, mostly the latter. One thing that we could say is it somewhat depends on the window. If we looked for sales tax, for example, if we looked at the post-COVID environment when sales tax is growing rapidly, well, that would give us a different set of assumptions. I think Michelle hit on some of that as you saw, like the prior year budgets growing pretty rapidly immediately following the pandemic when we had really conservative sales tax assumptions, and those turned out to be a little more pessimistic than we needed. Going back further than that helps us control for some of those things.
Great, thank you.
Right, and it is a combination. There are different percent revenue increases for property tax versus sales tax. We don't use the same number because we have more specific information informing each of those, but they are based on that time frame to inform those estimates.
Yeah, I think that's really well said to sharpen that a little bit. The sales tax assumption, for example, actually sales tax historically has grown about 4%, and that's what's built into the model. When you put all those revenues into one bucket, the bucket itself is growing by about 2% every year.
Are there other questions for Aaron? Nope. Okay.
All right. And so wanted to just be really transparent about things for consideration as we think about a revenue and expenditure projection. Priority is thinking about employee compensation and how we are able to compensate our employees in a very competitive market. I talked earlier about initiatives that will drive our strategic plan forward. So we'll be looking at whether those initiatives are existing or if additional resources might be needed to help bolster our effectiveness in moving our strategic plan forward. During the pandemic, with some of our ARPA funding, we had identified some department pilots that we will be evaluating over the next couple of months to look at a variety of evaluation tools, effectiveness, ROI. We're working on a scorecard just that we're going to start working with departments in the next couple of weeks. So those will be decisions that will be considered by the manager's office. We will expect to receive requests from our education partners with the school system, Wake Tech and Smart Start. We had some discussions with Smart Start last meeting. We have planned new replacement and expanded facilities that we already are aware of in terms of large capital projects. And then we also have some operating needs. Our housing continuum of care that we've taken on a leadership role that we will be building out what that looks like for what looks to be short term but will be evaluated. What impacts behavioral health programming might have on the budget in terms of any pilots that would be continued and any other behavioral health programming that we think will move services for clients and for the strategic plan. And then more basic, we have a software and we have additional costs for any kind of software. So giving you a bit of a picture, without actually having a picture, about some of the capital projects that are upcoming. With all of these, there will be some operating cost. In all, some sort of utility for certain is what we would expect to see some changes in. Others will have more significant FTE increases to support these buildings, and then others will be shifting resources, and others will, like our EMS master plan, libraries, and parks, could be the expansion in smaller numbers. So just being mindful as we go into our planning, these are again things that we're considering to evaluate for inclusion into the budget. So any discussion or questions on that section before Lindsay moves in with some benchmarking information for the school system?
Manager Ellis?
Yes, and so just so you all know, I've instructed our departments that I am not looking to see any expansions this year. I recognize that there may be some things for safety, but I have told departments not to spend their time bringing forth expansions this year.
And Commissioner Waters, could I just make a response or a comment on David's comment? I just wanted to share, and that ties back to some of the activities that are happening with collecting information around the initiatives in the strategic plan. There will be meetings with the manager's office starting this Friday into December, where they will collectively as a team look at what's in the business plans, identify alignments, identify where there might be collaboration opportunities, discuss priorities, and out of that could be where there are some efforts in addition to those I've shared already, where the manager's office might say, in order to move us on the needle on this item, there might be some need to add some resources. So just wanted to add, while not our traditional expansion activity that's been driven by departments submitting them, the manager's office will be looking more holistically. So, sorry.
Can I just ask a point of clarification, Michelle?
Yes.
You just mentioned meetings starting this Friday. Those are department meetings or manager office meetings?
Manager's office meetings.
Okay, thank
the
you.
Manager's office as a group looking at the business plans.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I was just curious, do you have any insight about changes in funding that the county may be dependent upon from the state or the federal level that may change? Does that play at all into the forecasting that you do, or is that just something as it happens, then you make those adjustments?
My broad comment is we will make adjustments as those happen. We are incorporating like historical fluctuations to try to respond to what might happen. At the moment, we are not aware necessarily of like a significant federal funding source that might be increasing. We know that some of our ARPA funding will be decreasing, so we need to be thinking about that. So those are some qualifications I can say are in the model, but Aaron, did you have anything?
I think you got to most of what I would add. I will add two points to kind of sharpen what you just said. So there already is an assumption that some level of the ARPA effort that we've been funding currently will continue. And we are going to have a full evaluation process for the scale and which projects move forward. But we are planning, well, some of the ARPA projects that we have invested in that have shown strong returns, we may consider keeping those. One example that I can give is one that actually happened last year that we have updated, already incorporated in the model, is Medicaid expansion. When Medicaid expansion happened, HHS saw a significant rise in revenue. Well, that rise in revenue and the resulting expenditures that came from Medicaid expansion have already been incorporated into the model. So the numbers that you saw today included any new revenue that we're getting from that to support that program and any new costs that are coming in. So kind of to Michelle's point, as those types of legislative changes become more clear what the county's impact on those things will be, those are incorporated.
So I think one of the things that Aaron and Michelle both alluded to, so this model is not static, right? So we'll be constantly updating it and putting new numbers into the model. But as of today, this is where we are. I would also, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would anticipate federal funding going back to kind of the pre-COVID days, right, where we weren't seeing a lot of federal funding. During COVID, you know, we had a lot of federal funds flowing in. Say that 3 times. But I would not anticipate anything like that occurring.
Commissioner Calabria and then Commissioner Stallings.
Did you have something to say? Or?
No.
Thank you. So a couple of things. In terms of the operating assumption that there won't be new expansion requests, are we explicitly open to reallocations within a department? So for example, if someone says, well, I think this dollar isn't effectively used, but I have an idea for how it can be used, are we encouraging folks to come forward with that sort of proposal?
Yes, in, I don't want to say like a defined effort, but we are trying. I wouldn't just say like, I can buy baseball mitts in the budget office. No, it's not just, identifying. We are trying to have them aligned with what our focus is around core mandated services and the strategic plan.
Absolutely.
So trying to keep it guided.
And then looking at the core mandated services that you talked about, it impresses me that it's the obvious metrics for us to look at involve things that we're trying that are new. Did they work? That sort of thing. We've run into what are relatively inside baseball, often very mundane metrics related to on-time rates in DHHS or that sort of thing, where they're a big deal, but it's like, your electric bill, electricity in your house, right? It's 1% of your mind share until it's not working, and then it's 95% of your mind share. And I wonder if we are looking at any metrics related to core services that maybe don't always rise to the level of public conversation, but are we looking at that sort of under the radar bread and butter stuff in terms of identifying things that we may need to focus on?
Yes, and we're still growing and evolving. I mean, I really want to recognize that we've been on a pathway with our transparency portal and evaluating programs, and it's, for good reason, been fits and starts, but we are definitely, as we build these business plans, we are working to have what we believe are appropriate, effective, and useful measures to be able to report on both our mandated core services, like something you shared of on-time metrics, for instance, and then also the more aspirational activities, so that I can just say we are collecting them and continuing to improve them so that they can be used over and over in a longitudinal way so that we can be evaluating them year over year.
Thank you.
It's a priority.
So one thing I want to go back to your first question, Matt. As we're looking at functions in departments, right? We are now taking a larger view and pulling it back because positions don't belong to departments. Positions belong to the organization, right? So we're actively looking at, if there's a program that may not give us the bang that we're looking for, we may not repurpose that position into that same department. It may get repurposed somewhere else. We're at the early stages of that, but that's kind of how we're looking at things now.
Yeah, and I would just add also, I think it's just in how we are, I don't know if centralizing is quite the right word, but there are really great metrics and measurements throughout our organization. It's just, again, us maturing into an organization that collects those and can communicate those more succinctly, more effectively, and just more directly to helping both you and the community understand what the progress is on success and where we might need to be making adjustments.
Thank you. Commissioner Stallings?
Yes, thank you. Just to follow up, Manager Ellis, what you were talking about, obviously I realize this will be fluid. As we know more, things will make adjustments and we'll adapt. But you mentioned, Manager Ellis, about pre-COVID funding at the federal level, and you don't have your crystal ball, I know, but what would you might predict we might have the biggest challenges with federal funding not being available? And housing is one thing that comes to my mind, but
So
I saw both Wayne and Morgan Perkins.
There's kind of the typical federal funding for housing, and then there was the COVID and things went up. I would anticipate that the COVID funding, I don't think we're going to get back to that level of federal funding.
Yes, I completely agree, and I would also say that there's some federal dollars that come from the Congress people's spaces that go into housing directly, and we do expect that we will no longer have access to those dollars. So the $2 million that went into Kings Ridge, funding that went into Hope Center at Pullen for youth aging out of foster care, those were dollars that came from Congresswoman Ross, but we do know that with the previous administration, those dollars were no longer available. So we do expect to see a reduction within that program, as well as within HUD funding. CDBG was also an area that was reevaluated during the previous administration, and so we are looking to see what that would mean for this upcoming administration for CDBG as well.
Ben?
And I think the dynamic that Morgan just described, I expect you'll see play out in formula grants across the federal spectrum, in HHS, housing, all the other agencies that provide formula funding of some sort. So we're going to talk about your federal and state priorities here in a minute, and we should go ask for more to maintain CDBG or keep increasing it. But all we can do is ask, right? I would not look to that to help offset this funding gap.
I would also add, too, that we are talking about money, but there are also some fair housing implications that come with this shift. And so as Ben speaks to the legislative priorities, that may be some things that we need to weave into our legislative priorities for the upcoming session.
Somehow, Michelle, I feel like they're trying to kick you off the podium and bring Ben up for legislative priorities, which is next on the agenda.
I'm going to let Aaron give all my bad news.
Oh, no. More questions? Vice Chair, did you have a comment or a question? Okay. All right. You good, Commissioner Stallings? No, no. You good? All right, Michelle?
All right. I'll have Lindsay join us to share some of our schools benchmarking information.
Thank you. So just to start us off, make sure we all have common definitions, wanted to lay the groundwork of how Wake County actually appropriates money to the school system. There's 3 types of buckets that we give. There's cash, just general fund appropriation that covers all operating costs that we will talk about in more detail on later slides. There's an appropriation for debt service that is used to pay down debt that was used to finance the building of buildings, and then also cash for capital that is used to finance smaller capital projects such as land acquisition or for technology devices. And then before we get deeper into purpose and function, wanted to also ground in what the state requires us to pay for and what the state allows the county to pay for. So the direct delegation column, that is what we are required to pay for, and it is primarily facilities, buildings, and maintenance. And then the indirect delegation is what allows us to pay for some extra operating costs. Right? So this is a screenshot of the FY25 adopted purpose and function, and it lays out how that first big operating bucket is divvied out across the school system. And there's the definitions of what those different buckets are. So the green boxes are an attempt to tie purpose and function back to the direct delegation, what we are required to pay for. The items on there that are not circled in the green are the indirect delegation, what we are allowed to pay for. All right, so that was a lot of definitions, and now we'll actually look at the dollars for it. So we benchmarked 10 peers looking at either size of the school system and or geography of the county. Of those benchmarked peers, we picked our 5 most relevant, again, based on size and geography. So we looked at Wake, Mecklenburg, Guilford, and Johnston. And then this slide shows what our general fund budget for those counties are, how much was given to public schools for operating, the percent of that public school budget as a percentage of the overall general fund budget, and then for context of how much of a school system that money is expected to cover, we have also included enrollment, including charter school numbers. So as you can see, Wake County has the highest enrollment, the largest general fund, and is also contributing the largest percentage of that general fund to the school system. Looking on the other side of things, this is the capital side. So again, looking at those 5 most relevant peers with how much is appropriated for debt service, cash funded capital to get that total capital investment, and then looking at how many school buildings that covers. So again, Wake County is at the top. We have the highest appropriation and the most number of schools. I will note that a couple of schools have opened since I made this slide. So Mecklenburg is now at 186 schools.
May I ask a question? Lindsay?
Yes.
Before we leave that slide, I was looking at all this earlier and just wondering if you have any context, looking particularly at the comparison between Wake and Mecklenburg as it comes to school facilities. You know, we're nearly double in our capital investment. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on why that would be, you know, because between 199 schools and 184 schools, that's not that far apart, but the investment. Is it that we in Wake have a whole lot more newer facilities that we're still financing and Mecklenburg is not in that same situation, or what do we attribute that to?
So square footage is definitely an element. Charlotte has a lot of really big schools, but more significantly, it's their accounting structure. The way that they have their debt service and their cash-funded capital set up does not translate directly to ours. So that 22 million is not quite the full picture. It is the best number, though, that we can use to represent what we are also budgeting. Let me see. I have it somewhere in front of me. Yes, so there's an additional 100 million that goes into capital for the school system that, because of their accounting structure, is allowed to go straight from the state into the school system. So it doesn't, yes.
I think also we can explore with them, when we spoke with them. Yeah, we can explore with them more, in addition to us having a very different accounting structure, understanding from them how their program is built. It is built differently than us. I believe that where we have taken the approach of every year, we fund capital, whether there is a GO bond or not. It might layer into how they are actually pursuing their financing. So that's something we can look into. We didn't talk about that when we met with them last.
Okay. I found it curious, for sure. Thank you.
Is that something that we can either bring to a committee or make sure we document for discussion when we talk about education?
Yes.
For the budget? Thank you.
All right. So taking the previous 2 slides and smushing them together and then adding in some historical data, this slide shows, going back to FY21, the total appropriation from counties to schools. So operating dollars, debt-funded capital, and cash capital. And as you can see, Wake County has been outpacing our peers for appropriations to schools since at least FY21, and the gap between Wake County and our closest peer has also been increasing over that time. I see thoughtful faces, so I'll let that marinate for a moment.
These are in exact dollars and not percentages
Yes.
or anything, so different districts are different sizes, but.
Sorry, I think Commissioner Stallings had a question or a comment.
Well, this is just a what if. I'm curious, how does that translate to student outcomes?
That is information we can try to find for you. All right. So the next section of this presentation, we will look more into local supplements, so focusing in on pay. We will be looking at DPS data for this to make sure that we are looking at apples to apples as much as we can. And the most recent data available from DPI is from the 22-23 school year. So local supplement is what we pay on top of that state-based salary. Okay. This table is pulled from the school system website. They have each year of experience for every type of position available in a Google Doc for public viewing. So this slide is a selection of certain milestone years of experience and shows the state base plus the local supplement for that many years of experience to get your total annual pay. So for example, you can see from 0 to 10 years of experience, the state base steps up pretty steadily, and the local supplement is also growing, but a little bit tighter together. But then as you get later in your years of experience, the state base flattens out and local supplement starts to make up more space across that salary range. So again, looking to our 10, yes?
I think Commissioner Stallings has a question.
I was just confused by the non-certified part of that table. Could someone speak to that?
It is one of the salary schedules. There are certified teachers and non-certified teachers. This was one of the lower salary ranges, so I used it as an example.
How many non-certified teachers do we have in Wake County?
I defer to our former school board members, but I think non-certified doesn't mean that they're not certified to be teachers. It's a classification, and
correct.
Maybe you all would be able to articulate that better than I would. Not to put anybody on the spot, but.
And I thought I had the number of certified and non-certified employees, but I can get that and respond.
And I was just going to share when AJ Matillo, who leads the district's HR, was here previously. He shared that there are many, many different salary schedules that are used to look at employee compensation, and I think that's what you're saying. This is just one that has a lower rate of pay, but many examples of different employees at different levels, both certified and non-certified.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so then taking that local supplement and putting it in the context of our peers, the total teacher positions based on that DPI data for the FY24 year was 10,708 positions, and the average supplement, so across all those various salary schedules, across all years of experience, was $9,828 and was ranked second across the state. I will note here, Chapel Hill, Carborough City Schools, as well as Asheville City Schools, marked with the asterisk, have a special tax district that they levy additional dollars for local supplement from. In addition to funding local supplement, there are also some positions that the county is responsible for funding or for funding gaps in coverage across the schools where state funding formulas do not provide enough positions. There is a funding formula handout that has a whole bunch of information about this, but we do have some examples of those positions here. So for school health personnel, the county has an MOU with the school system where we provide one school nurse for every 2 schools. Cafeteria workers and child nutrition support positions are paid for by the county. Behavioral health supports were previously funded by ESSER dollars, so going back to that decline in federal dollars that we expect to see. And then there are additional examples here in counselor, psychologist, specialized teaching positions, and I do have all of the funding formulas if you guys are interested in any particulars.
So I just have one quick question about that. On these various positions, some of them, I understand about the nursing, but say some of the others, is it that we're funding all the positions or that we're just funding more than the state formulas would allow?
It's a combination of both of those.
Okay. Just didn't want folks to think in all of these categories we were funding every position by the county, because I don't think that's the case, but we're filling in gaps.
For these types of positions, there are at least some employees who are fully funded by the county.
Right.
If that helps.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Mile?
Yes, my question is a little different. In terms of funding the public school system, are we completely turn over all our funds at the beginning of the year once, or do we quarterly? How do we disperse there?
That is a question that I wish my finance friends were here to answer, but loosely I can tell you that there is a monthly conversation between finance staff and the school system finance staff to break out a monthly disbursement of that total appropriation. Pat is here.
I don't think
Yeah.
Pat's as involved in that, but
Right.
it is about once a month. It's divided by 12.
So essentially an upfront appropriation, but a monthly check of that money. Okay. So we will next move into looking at per pupil, and again, a grounding slide. This is again DPI data based on LEAs, and the definition for PPE at the DPI level does include a caveat that there are some funds for total schools budget that is not applicable to this number. So it's not as easy as 702.8 million divided by 160,000 kids. Right, so looking at the history of the Wake County appropriation budgeted per pupil, looking back towards FY21, you can see that per pupil has been increasing steadily over the last few years from around 6% to 9%, getting us up to $3,922 in our FY25 budget. Right, so then taking those numbers and that definition and putting it in the context of our benchmarked peers, we have a statewide rank for Wake County Schools of 17th, looking at the enrollment ADM of 157,847. And again, this is the DPI data from the 2022-2023 school year. When you look at local PPE plus state and federal to get total PPE, Wake County's rank falls to 103rd across the state. This is the same information, just looking at a percentage of how much the state provides of the total PPE versus how much the local counties provide of the PPE. Wake County's split is about 30% local, 59% state, and then 11% federal.
In looking at this, I just wondered if we know what all the reasons for the fact that our state PPE number is lower than some of the counties I would consider our peers. I mean, in other words, I'm aware of the allocation that was made a couple of years ago for teacher supplement pay that did not come to 5 of the counties, including Wake. But I'm just curious that some others are, you know, and Guilford was one of those counties. I'm pretty sure Durham and Orange was one of those counties, but yet their state PPE is higher than ours. I just don't know if anybody knows anything about why that is, but would it have to do with funding for special populations and some of those things that may not be consistent?
So the Fiscal Research Division of the General Assembly does have some information published about this, and their information is that generating the state budget for education is based on some combination of 3 formulas. So base allotments based on your average daily membership, allotments addressing student characteristics, which can be children with disabilities, limited English proficiency, that type of thing, and then allotments addressing LEA characteristics, which can be size or wealth or that kind of item, and then a caveat of up to the appropriators in addition to those elements. Commissioner Waters.
Thank you. So when I was looking at the enrollment, of course, Wake being at the top and then Mecklenburg within 10,000, but then, you know, there's a tremendous gap between the next school district being Guilford. Did you do any peer benchmarking for comparable school districts across the country that were maybe more similar and what that looked like. And then I'm also wondered if you could remind me about the levied special tax, how that comes about.
Yep, so we did consider looking at peers across the country, but because the state funding formulas are so integral to what our school budgets are, it didn't really provide good context for what people are doing, unfortunately. And then the special tax districts, did you want to know the amount of them?
Or just how they're able to, and if other municipalities are able to do that, or is it just unique to these?
I believe there is one other one across the state, but they're special tax districts, much like the fire tax district. There's a defined area where the residents are being served this specific service, and they pay an additional tax rate to get that service. The most recent attempt to do another tax special situation, there was a ballot measure for Guilford County to do an additional sales tax specific for schools employee pay. However, it was voted down.
Other questions, comments?
All right, so going back to PPE, this just shows the context of, if you isolate our local PPE, we have the rank of 17, but then when you look at total PPE, we fall to 103rd, which is a delta of 86 slots across the state. All right, and then this is zooming into those 5 most relevant peers that we looked at previously, looking at the breakout of local, state, and federal PPE. As you can see, Wake County has the lowest state PPE, but not the lowest overall PPE of those 5 peers. All right, so as we take all of this context and look forward, wanted to provide some ranges of what it may look like to increase the school's funding budget. So the table here has an estimate for what the tax implication would be to increase the school's budget: 30 million, 40 million, or 50 million over FY26, 27, and 28, and it's somewhere between 1 cent and 1.6 cents for those increases. And now I will hand it back over to Michelle.
Before Lindsay leaves up here, any other questions? The questions about how the different school districts are very valid, and we keep coming up with very complex, and we don't seem to come with a very simple answer. So as you have continued questions around that, we can think about it for joint meetings, et cetera. I know that's a tough thing to think about.
Commissioner Stallings?
I was curious, could you speak to the federal, how does the federal formula work for PPE?
Did you have some information, Lindsay?
It's based on, is it Title IX? It's one of the titles. Thank you. And it is very closely tied to wealth or special risk factors. I believe, not to put you on the spot, Vice Chair Evans, but I think you have more information about this than I do.
Federal funding for public schools is primarily entitlement fundings, so it's generally going to just depend upon how much poverty and other things you have in your district. It's the Title I school funding, child nutrition funding. That's all the federal funding is. It's just entitlement things. And that just, what your complexion of your community is dictates how much of that you get. Does that make sense?
Is it consistently applied?
I don't know. We would have to explore that. We'd have to look into that. I think similar to other formulas, it's probably more complex than a simple binary response.
Other questions, comments? Okay.
So in closing then, we are forging towards budget forecasting that enables us to look at projections over a multi-year basis and also to drive investments around our strategic plan and really understanding what our core services and what our departments are aiming to achieve for their clients and their services. And we will continue on that path. We are really reorienting how we are approaching budgeting with having some more of a strategic approach that will be able to inform resources and be able to continually incorporate that into our multi-year forecast to help us identify programmatic sustainability and to determine where our metrics are moving in the direction we are happy with and where we need to make some adjustments. And then just the summary from the benchmarking is, at high level, you can all make your own determinations, but something that came to us is that our local appropriation is one of the highest among our peers in North Carolina, and our state funding continues to be among the lowest in North Carolina. So, David, I don't know if you have any other closing comments?
You really closed it. That was a good closing, Michelle. We wanted you all to kind of understand that we're not being complacent. We really believe there's a better way of budgeting going forward, and so this is kind of the option that we've landed on, and we're still tweaking it as we go. But I firmly believe this will continue to set us up for success going forward. And I just want to thank Michelle and Aaron and everybody for pulling this together. You guys did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron and Lindsay. And team.
Lindsay, yep. Other comments, questions for Michelle?
Lindsay has great snacks in
Or
her office.
Lindsay has snacks?
Has snacks in her office.
Any other questions for Michelle, Lindsay, or Aaron? All right, thank you all so much. Commissioners, we're going to take a brief break, like 7 minutes, while Ben gets ready. Thank you, Ben.
Good afternoon. So let me go ahead and answer the question that segues over, and you may be wondering, can federal and state funding fix that financial model? And the short answer is no, but there are some intersections, and there are some opportunities to get a little bit of assistance and maybe a little bit of breathing space on specific things. And I'll hit that as we get to it. So today is a direct follow-up to the discussion we had 2 months ago about state and federal legislative priorities. We're going to recap your top 3 asks and the opportunity list. I'll highlight a few edits and follow-up information that y'all asked for in September. And today I am looking for your endorsement with any changes you want to make today for this slate of priorities so that I and other staff can proceed with next steps. So some quick context. We've talked about this before, but I just want to re-hit it because it really does set the stage for everything we talk about. We wish we had tons of chips to play and lots of political capital. I would argue the situation today is largely the same as it was for the past 2 years. I know the math in the State House of Representatives changed a little bit, but I would argue until we see something different, things may not change generally. And as I've shared with this board, we know from the past 2 years that this legislature has taken a critical look at the role of local government, particularly in regulating development and in other key areas. So we just need to be very deliberate and careful about what we ask for. And then the other piece is the big piece of pie. In reality, that's how much time we're going to play spending defense. And the small piece of pie is what we hope we can spend playing offense on those top 3 things and maybe a few opportunities that pop up here and there. So, again, just to recap quickly, the 3-prong approach that we take to legislative priorities, starting with general guidance, and this is just the general policy guidance to the manager's office and our contracted lobbyists. I can go through the whole thing if you want me to, but this reflects your ongoing board interests and allows us to act quickly when we need to. And so let me tie a couple specific examples to your prior discussion. So if we learn that the state legislature intends to reduce the state funding that goes into the allocation formula for public schools, I know that y'all as a board will oppose that, and Philip knows that, and we'll fight against it. If we hear that the U.S. Congress is going to reduce the money that goes into the CDBG block grant that we use for housing projects, we know that this board will oppose that. Jennifer Emo in D.C. knows that, and so we would do what we can to fight against it. That's part of what general guidance is. It's basically you're giving me and your lobbyists permission to play defense. Then there's your top 3 list. We're going to walk through that in a minute, and the opportunity list. So top 3 for the state. This is what I propose. I have not heard any different direction in the past 2 months. So the top 3 we're recommending for the state are housing affordability, foster care, and a little more narrowly, the tax lien signage matter. Within housing affordability, we can kind of boil this down to supporting housing developers by expanding the state's low-income housing tax credit program and also making the criteria for that program more flexible. We would love to see the state get into gap financing just like y'all do. Or if they want to, they can get into grant programs or housing trusts or other forms of financial assistance. And something, and this is newer for our platform here, is look at authorizing counties to develop teacher housing, because we know all 100 counties need that. Within foster care, we seek to clarify the roles of LMEs and other entities for placements of youth with acute needs. We'd love to see the legislature require NCHHS to create and operate some regional placement facilities to help us out and the other 99 counties. Seek full state reimbursement for county financial support to fictive kin. This is effectively more financial support for kinship care. One question that came up specifically last time was, could we add child care to part of that? HHS staff have shared that currently fictive kin providers are already eligible for child care vouchers. And then Medicaid coverage for foster family supplies. We had diapers on there. We learned that diapers are largely already covered. We want to see feminine hygiene products covered and other similar things that families need. And then tax lien signage. So a bill that passed back in July requires a posted sign on every lien property. This is an unfunded mandate. Commissioners asked for an estimate of that. We ballpark it at $150,000. But it's not so much the cost of why we're asking to have this repealed, but really it's these 3 reasons. One is it's not safe. It's not safe for an employee or a contractor to go out and post a sign. It's not consistent with our customer-friendly approach. Marcus and his team work really hard to keep things from escalating, to keep that communication going back and forth. And we just don't see it as helping with that matter. And then it's just not efficient. It's not going to be helpful. It's not going to help us increase our collection rate. And so we're going to ask to repeal this provision if you approve this as part of your package. So that's the top 3 that we discussed 2 months ago. Yes, ma'am.
Ben, I just wanted to ask a question. When we go back to the housing affordability slide, I know that we talked, the 3rd bullet you have is authorize counties to develop teacher housing. Did we have a conversation about whether that was workforce housing or specific to teacher housing?
We did not in September, okay. But certainly we welcome guidance today. And I don't know, Morgan, if you want to elaborate or speak to any of the possibilities in that area? Yeah.
So we've had a chance to talk a bit with Tyler Mulligan at the School of Government, and so in North Carolina, we are not authorized to set aside housing that's specific to teachers in any way, whether it's affordable housing, workforce housing, whatever it may be, due to fair housing regulations and things like that. We need to be able to have that permission. And so we've had talks with folks in Scott's office around the interpretation of that policy. And so we do think that if we are going to move in this direction to provide housing for our teachers, that it is, beneficial to Wake County to request this allowance for housing for teachers specifically. So not just creating broad affordable housing, but for our specialized populations like our teachers so that they can stay within Wake County where we are also employing them. And so we hope to go in that direction. We've seen some movement in a very positive way in Western North Carolina. And so we plan to follow that cadence to also make that same request for Wake County.
So 2 follow-up comments, I guess, or questions. So is teacher defined as K-12, public school? Is that, and I'm thinking from the Wake Tech position, right? And when they're looking at professors, so I'm looking at educators in general, thinking about what the language is like there. And then also just to mention that this is not a goal that is on the NCACC's legislative agenda. It's not even one to be considered. Housing is not there at all for the upcoming legislative conference. And so I'm very much in support of something around housing. I just want it to be specific because if it does come up this weekend, I want to be able to speak to, or this week, speak to the importance of it for all 100 counties.
Right. I mean, so to your first question, typically when you look to teacher housing, it's K through 12. It is not including professors and folks that are in the university and higher education scope. That's not to say that we can't have that be inclusive of what we are requesting, but it is typically up to, between that K to 12 spectrum.
Okay, thank you so much. Manager Ellis has a question?
Morgan, would I know it says teacher housing, so would that exclude bus drivers or cafeteria workers, or would they potentially be included in that?
So by definition of that legislation, it is specific to our teachers. Yes, that is correct.
Commissioner Calabria and then Commissioner Mile.
Sorry, so I just want to make sure I understand the legal framework here. So is there a state statute prohibition on setting aside housing for teachers, or is there a state prohibition on setting aside housing based on profession, but in some western North Carolina counties, there's an exception for educators of some kind?
So it is specific to teachers, to educators. And so, on a county-by-county basis, you do have to put forth a request to do housing for teachers within your county. And so we have seen tremendous success for every county who has requested it receiving, being granted the ability to build housing for teachers, but it is something that we have to ask from the legislature.
Oh, so so you basically need a local bill from the legislature to be granted, but you got to go through that process.
That's correct.
And so if you wanted to provide housing for police officers or welders or whatever, that's permitted under state law, but teachers, you have to get a special waiver, essentially?
So I have not been in the weeds of other, first responders and things like that, so I cannot confirm that piece. But I will say that if you do housing that's specific to those types of populations, you do run into fair housing issues. And so we typically don't set aside housing for broad first responders, but there is this special asterisk for teachers within North Carolina where we are allowed to do it so long as we request that permission from the state.
Mm-hmm. And when you say fair housing, you mean federal criteria?
That is correct. So disparate impacts of us setting aside housing for one specific population that could impact the 7 protected classes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Rao?
Yes, I think she probably just answered my question, because my concern was, are we opening ourselves up for other occupations? Because that sounds like what we were doing if you narrowing the scope in terms of not saying that the teachers don't deserve and need, but then the firemen, because we've experienced the same thing. Many of our firemen and police officers are not able to live in the county. They are living outside the scope. So that was my concern, and I think that you answered that when you was communicating with Commissioner Calabria there. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stallings?
How many counties have successfully asked for this and gotten it?
So I am only aware of 3 counties who successfully operate teacher housing. And Scott, tell me if you're aware of others, but there are 3 that I am aware of that operate teacher housing type models within their community. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ben?
Commissioners, those are great questions. I guess so let me ask, are y'all comfortable with that bullet there? Because if you're not, that's okay. We can remove it because we still have lots to work on here. If you're not, we can always come back to it later. I think having it here basically gives permission to us to explore this.
Vice Chair? I'm fine with it. I just wanted to ask the question so I could have clarification on teacher and housing, and I think Morgan did a great job in answering my question and addressing my concern.
And when it comes to the tactics that you want to pursue on Thursday and Friday at the NCACC, we might discuss whether or not you want to include that one or not.
Thank you.
No, thank you all. Good questions. All right, the opportunity list. So as a reminder, this is the list where advocacy work is not guaranteed, But the manager's office has discretion to pursue if something pops up. So for example, if a bill pops up that we see as advancing or helping Wake County out in the issue, with the issue of orphan roads, we have permission to help advocate for it or to tell people that the Wake County Board of Commissioners would support this. And so this is your current list. I added universal meals at y'all's request last time, as well as the other things in italics: broadband, JCPC programming, clerks of court, and Smart Start child care programs. This doesn't mean we wouldn't necessarily advocate for other things as part of that general guidance thing. So if the legislature was considering more money for public schools, I know that y'all would support that, and we would make that known.
Commissioner Calabria?
Thank you, ma'am. So just to make sure I understand make sure my recollection of the statutory scheme is correct on the Medicaid piece. So you have someone who enters, who becomes incarcerated, who has Medicaid coverage. That is basically, that expires when they go into the state's custody, and then they have to reapply when they come out, which is what creates so many issues. Is that right? And so I think there was some conversation about whether or not you can suspend it versus have it terminated, and then it kind of automatically turns back on after they get out versus them having to reapply and go through all the process again. Am I remembering that correctly? Are those the dynamics?
How?
Yes, generally those are the dynamics of the way that it would work. There's some work that needs to be done at the federal level that could be really especially beneficial, but I think at the state level, the legislative authority has already been identified, but it would be the resource and the prioritization for the administrative offices to be able to actually implement suspension rather than termination. So I think if there's a legislative action, it would be resource allocation and prioritization of that for the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Public Safety to make that happen.
So DHHS could do it, but then if they did do it, it would require a lot of tracking and all of that kind of stuff, and they just...
And the technology solutions to make that communication happen between the Department of Public Safety and the Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments or questions about the opportunity list for Ben? Commissioner Morrow?
Yeah, well, no, my comment is that, Bobby, being the director with the NCACC, several of these items are already on the list that they will be bringing forth.
Yep.
That's true, and I think that'll give us an opportunity again to sign on. But we will see after Friday which things stay on the list, right? Because that is the point of this conference, is to narrow those legislative goals. So we'll see what still remains. But that does give us an opportunity to sign on to something that someone else might propose and know that the state association will also be advocating for what's good for 100 counties, right? Vice Chair?
I would just say, I would ask everybody to read over what the NCACC sent out. Most of their goals that they're supporting at the moment were really broad and generic and didn't get into a lot of specifics. So you won't see specific wording about teaching us instructional assistance or any of that. But I also did want to comment, so Commissioner Calabria would be aware that the Education Steering Committee did discuss state funding for universal meals, or more funding for school meals. We didn't frame it as one thing or the other. It cleared the Education Steering Committee meeting, but it did not clear the overall Goals Committee or the board.
It cleared the Goals Committee. It did not clear the board.
So it's not on the list, but it did clear the Education Steering Committee, so there's some hope.
Yeah. And one of the differences that we'll see that is not necessarily in the wording that we have, but that the NCACC uses, is seek versus support. And so support is signing on to something else that someone else has proposed, and seeking is them advocating or finding someone to sponsor a bill specifically. And so those are the two differentiators or distinguishers for NCACC schools.
And some of those same ones, they weren't completely eliminated. They just advised that there would be more study on them in terms of moving forward. So they haven't been completely eliminated, but they're still on the table, so there's still going to be some conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben.
All right, moving to the federal level, our recommended top three remains, focusing on earmark requests, housing affordability, and EMS medication and supply challenges. On earmark requests, I'm not going to recap everything I talked about 2 months ago, but in general, what we need to do is adapt to our new map that starts in January. We'll have, we will be covered by 3 congressional districts, although, really it's going to be that central one to which Congresswoman Ross was reelected. Congresswoman Fouché represents basically the southwestern corner. And then in this very odd periphery district, there'll be another congressional district. And we will do our best to get creative and come up with an earmark request there. The geography of it may make that one difficult, but we'll explore it. And after doing this for 2 years, we're getting better at developing sort of a criteria-based approach to this. Projects that we as a county need, and we look very heavily to our 7-year CIP for that. It needs to fit within the House and Senate appropriation guidance. It needs to fit within federal agency rules and regulations. One that is particularly tricky is the alignment of the project timing with the availability of funds. That's kind of a fun little game to play. Where it falls in the congressional district, and just recognizing reality, we want these to be a good photo op for everybody involved.
Ben, just really quickly, is there an opportunity, or could we create an opportunity for both Jennifer and Philip to talk to us a little bit about the landscape after January and what the opportunities might be for earmarks? I know that over the last few years, it has changed, and so Jennifer has been good about giving us guidance on how we can apply or what fits and what doesn't fit, so that we don't just have a Santa Claus wish list. But it's more tailored to things that we know we might actually have an opportunity to receive. So early next year sometime.
Yes, we can do it. And one thing I really appreciate from all the commissioners is that, at least over the past 2 years, you have let staff really look at your adopted capital plan as one of the primary guides. And we, one thing I've learned is there's not a lot of use in submitting too many earmark requests. You're only going to get so many, even in a good year. Representative Ross has a lot of territory to cover. She has a certain number she can give out. Wake County is only going to get a certain number. That's just the reality of earmarks. And so I think one thing that can be helpful for all of us to do is just focus on looking at what our needs are. And I would argue through the budget process, you do that. Housing affordability at the federal level, this is asking Congress to preserve or increase funding to block grants like CDBG or the HOME program, expanding the federal low-income housing tax credit, and making pilot programs permanent. For example, the PRICE grant, which helps maintain or improve manufactured housing. We got a big grant for that recently. I forget what the total was, but we would love to see programs like that move from pilot to permanent. Dr. Cabañas is not here to help me explain this one, but our EMS system is experiencing some difficulties getting certain emergency medications. And it's a lot of basic stuff like saline, pain meds, but we still have supply chain issues there, formulary changes, and costs are just running high. And what we're seeing is that EMS systems, just for whatever reason, don't have that bulk purchasing power that hospitals have. And then at the federal level, this is our opportunity list. And again, the items in italics at the end, we added at your request. So broadband access again, and rights for persons with disabilities. The others remain the same as last year. So next steps, I would appreciate an endorsement of those top 3 and the opportunity list. Certainly, if a few months down the road, if y'all want to revise anything, we can. An immediate next step is to participate in the NCACC's Legislative Goals Conference, because it's always better if it's not just Wake County asking for it, but our association and as many counties as we can get. And we will begin preparing materials for the state legislature's long session and the 119th Congress that starts in January. Questions?
Questions, comments? I just have a few. So Ben, I know that we had talked before about the legislative conference that NACO does in February, March, whenever, and not necessarily not participating, but not using that as the opportunity for us to go and lobby specifically, but to try to have a meeting here like we'd had in the past. So bringing Congresswoman Ross, last time it was Congressman Nickel. And so is that still the plan? Is that something that we would anticipate will happen again next year or try to happen?
Yes, Chair. The feedback I've received from the board, or we've received the past 2 years, is that y'all have really liked that spring, late winter meeting with as many of our congressional delegation as we can get and as many Senate staffers as we can get. So unless you direct me differently, my assumptions are basically that you may choose to attend the NACO Legislative Conference, which this year is I believe it's the first weekend of March. But we will not set up congressional visits like we did 2 years ago and in the past. I just found that those were not a good use of your time or anybody's time. And we will pursue that spring meeting with as many of our representatives as we can get.
Okay, thank you. And I wondered about that too, because it gives us an opportunity, like you said, if we wanted to go back at some point and update the top 3 or the opportunity list, that we have that discretion, at least until the spring when we present those as our goals to the federal partners.
Yes, ma'am. And the congressional staffers have given very positive response, that their members really
good
have liked that.
Awesome, thank you. Other comments or questions? Manager Ellis?
So I just a comment. I want to thank Ben. If you all recall, a year or so ago, we didn't really have a process, and I want to thank Ben for putting the time in and developing a process so you all know what to expect and when to expect it going forward. So thank you, Ben.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Ben.
One thing I didn't put on next steps is, if you're wondering how else can you help, we hear about bills of concern in many different ways, and one of those ways is y'all send me stuff like, hey, I was at this gathering whenever, and such legislative staffer said they might blah, blah, blah. Don't assume I know that. We get information lots of different ways, but please do that. And maybe I've already heard it 10 times. That's okay. I'd rather I would appreciate you taking the time to let me know, and that's going to be important when we get into this long session, and bad bills are going to be coming down left and right for a few weeks. So.
Okay, so you said that you wanted to know if this was a goal list that we were comfortable with so that you can move forward. Colleagues? Thumbs up? Yeah. Everybody?
All right.
Both state and federal. Thank you, Ben.
Thank y'all so much.
All right, commissioners. Well, that is the last thing. Manager Ellis has something to say, but that is the last thing on our agenda. So, Manager Ellis?
Sure. So where'd she go? Denise Foreman, come on up. You snuck away.
You're the next contestant on The Price is Right.
I just wanted to recognize Denise for the Behavioral Health Forum last week. It was probably the most well-attended forum we've had, so thank you for all that you did. You had a great team, but thank you. Would you like to say anything about it?
Thank you very much. Love being on the spot. Yes, actually, it turned out fantastic. We had a tremendous team that helped do the planning, put the content together, that did our speaking, and then really the way the summit is designed, we turn it over to the participants as much as possible, because that's really the value for us. You all talk a lot about community engagement and really making sure that we as an organization and in a community are valuing that, and that's a tremendous opportunity for us to do that. We assigned folks to tables so that you didn't get to just talk to the people who might have a perspective that looks a lot like yours. And so the takeaways that we heard from a lot of folks is what they learned from each other at the tables in those forced dialogues and facilitated dialogues. We had 26 facilitators trained and ready to help navigate those conversations. So it was just tremendous. And so we're super appreciative of everybody who came together and helped us plan that and then execute it. It was a lot to do do in a day. But I think what we have heard from folks is it was really successful, and now we have a lot of work to do to implement those priorities that were identified by those 250 folks that helped us prioritize our list that we had there. So much more work to do coming forward to build off of what we've been doing. No huge surprises, so I think that was good. A lot of the work that we've been doing is on track, just much more to do. So thank you for the recognition and for all the support, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise.
Weren't they great?
They were.
Awesome. Yeah.
They were.
Thank you.
And it was great. Initially, I was like, no, it's the day after the election. We're all tired. But honestly, a behavioral health conference the day after the election was much needed for lots of folks. All right, so that is the end of the work session agenda, but we do have some folks with us. Catherine, where's Catherine? Oh, there you are. Okay. For the Wake County Food Security Plan, the Food Justice Cohort. And so I want to give Catherine an opportunity to tell us a little bit about with the whole crew, yay, the whole cohort.
Cooperative Extension never does anything alone, in case you know. I'm Sydney Myrup. I think I know most of y'all. We are not going to take a ton of your time because you've been sitting in a 2-hour-long meeting. We are going to feed you. But we wanted to share a little bit. Last week, we presented to the Health and Human Services Committee about the Food Security Plan update. One of the things that we really were excited about with that project was our Food Justice Cohort, which is a group of community members that helped us define how the funding would be used. And so we've invited them here tonight. So far, we have 2 out of the 5. I know one works on the Board of Elections, so she might still be doing a little bit of that. And then I did get 1 decline, so if they may pop up as we're here, but we really just wanted to acknowledge the work that they've done and give y'all time to meet with them and hear their perspective of what it was like to see county processes from the back end as a community member that's trying to make funding accessible to the community. And so the cohort over the last year really served with us, and they helped in partnership. Crystal's team helped us a ton, and also our Food Policy Council with setting up training and materials to get them ready to help us design how we would release the food security plan funding to the community. And so they helped us draft RFPs. They set the parameters for how we would award the funds. And in that process, they directly reviewed and awarded funding for our communal garden projects, pantry innovations, our mobile markets, and some of them served on the Community Health Worker Committee. So in total, they had influence on over $1.2 million of that funding that went out to community members, over 29 community organizations. And we had 21 new vendors that are new to getting funding from the county, which was one of our goals, was smaller orgs accessing the funds. ARPA was a huge bucket of money. We wanted to make sure the community felt they had a say in how it was spent, and I think we did that really well. And we are going to move the work forward a little bit with Crystal's team. I don't know, do you want to share? You want me to? Okay.
So my name is Crystal Carmichael with Division of Race Equity in the Office of DEI, and we had such an amazing experience working with the Food Justice Cohort. And one of the things that we highlighted within that time was the correlation between what we talk about in the blueprint to dismantle systemic racism, which there are 2 major topics that this is in direct correlation with, which is health and economic mobility. And so we're looking forward to continuing the work of the Food Justice Cohort so that we can increase capacity. One of the biggest things that the cohort highlighted was that the access to funding, there were so many barriers to the access to funding. So we want to make sure that we continue this work in building capacity for our Black and brown farmers in the agricultural space, and making sure that we continue to make progress in ensuring that they can access funding. So we're looking forward to creating this 18-month coaching cohort where we can develop a train-the-trainer type program. So it's not just the small group that we had with the Food Justice Cohort, but we are now expanding that learning and that access to others in the community. So we're looking forward to developing that program and building more farmers in our community to help us in the health and economic mobility space.
And so I'll introduce, we've got Elke, I'm going to say your last name, while? Okay, I've been saying it wrong for many years. Elke is really an expert in our Latino, Hispanic, refugee populations. I used to call her all the time and get help, and she's amazing. And then we also have Terrell Debnan here. He's the president of the Wake County Young Farmers and Ranchers Group, and then he's also an active person in the community as well. And so we also not here right now. Hopefully she will come. We had Erin McClellan, who's on the Fertile Ground Food Co-op. She's the executive director of that group. And we also had Crystal Taylor, who formerly worked with the Black Farmers Market, and Erica Porter with Southeast Raleigh YMCA. So hopefully they'll come and show their faces, their lovely faces. But we mostly wanted to offer y'all some food and to really celebrate and acknowledge them for the work that they did. It was long evenings with kids running around in the background, babies crying, kids crying, very dense subject matter of looking through really long applications. So I just wanted to acknowledge them for their work and give y'all some tasty food from Miss Bonnie's Kitchen. She's a Black business out of Zebulon, and her food is really good. So,
thank you, guys. Commissioners, do you have colleagues, comments or questions maybe? Comments, no questions, comments. Does anybody have comments? Commissioner Calabria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I just really want to congratulate you all and thank you for all the work that you have done. This is one of those things where sometimes you just stumble on something and you wonder, why didn't we do this 10 years ago? Why didn't we? But this area of inequality and inequity is an area that's easy to overlook because we rightly pay a lot of attention to housing and we rightly pay a lot of attention to other areas. And so this can fly under the radar sometimes, and being able to put some emphasis on it and put some really, good brains and a lot of effort toward this work has really just been wonderful. And everything that I've heard from observers, partners, everybody has been resoundingly positive about the work that you all have done. And it turns out that the community was hungry. I mean, not just literally, but also you all are we've got folks who are hungry to get involved and to explore careers in agriculture and to do so many wonderful things. But if you don't, sometimes you have a lot of potential, but if you don't create a structure for that to succeed, a lot of times it never really for leading the county's efforts. But again, just thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Calabria. Other comments? Commissioner Mile.
Yes, thank you so